Kurt Mussina is the CEO of Paradigm Clinical Research, and today we're going to talk about the business of running clinical sites and some interesting use of AI around setting up that business. Kurt, welcome to CC Life Science.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, happy to be here.
I'm looking forward to this one. So, just for people who might not be familiar about the site business, it was all new to me. Describe what it is, how it works, what the different models might be.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can start with kind of the operating model side of things. So there's a couple of different ways you might run this business. We'll start with the way we do it. So we we operate fully owned, fully dedicated research sites. So what that means is that we'll go into a market, find space to lease, we'll negotiate lease terms, we'll negotiate tenant improvement allowances. And then once that's all done, we'll be part of the build out, and then we'll staff that site with our own people, our own coordinators. And I think the thing that makes us a little bit different is that we put sub investigators in each of our sites, and then we go out into those markets and look for physicians who are interested in participating in studies and contract with them as principal investigators. That's how we do it. There's others out there that embed themselves in physicians' practices or
Mm.
perhaps in hospital systems. And in those instances, you would take a coordinator and place you would embed that coordinator in that physician's practice or in some hospital or something like that. And then there's, I suppose, the networks of sites where it's more arm's length and you sort of just um, manage sites from a distance, I would say. So you're finding them new studies. You're not, the coordinators are not your employees. They're employees of the PI. And you might be, for instance, besides doing the business development work for them, managing payments and contracts and things like that. So there's sort of three, in my view, at least three basic operating models. Ours, like I said, standalone, fully dedicated clinical research sites. Embedded sites where again you put your staff in a physician's practice, and then third, some more arm's length networks. I can tell you something about the advantages and disadvantages of each of these if that was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we do that, can I just
Yeah.
I want to get a sense of the workflow. So physicians, have patients. They know that there are clinical trials going on and they're matching those up or you're matching those up. Patients come in. Is there
hmm
research going on at the site or analysis, or is it a lot about collecting samples for those doctors, physicians, and sponsors?
I mean, for us, the majority of the the study visits would happen in our clinic. In the embedded model where you have coordinators in a physician's practice, then the study visits are happening in the physician's practice.
Right.
So you know uh, for the most part, I think a lot of people think that we're managing trials as a site business, but we're really only participating in a part of it, right? We're one
Right.
part of typically many sites that are participating in a
Yeah.
study. So we're managing just a part of it, and we're out finding physicians who are the right physicians for that study, and then working with that physician and others to find patients who are eligible for these studies. That's for patient studies. For healthy volunteer studies, we also need to find physicians to work with, but then you're not really recruiting from that physician's patient base, although you may be, but you're also recruiting, healthy volunteers off the street, so to speak.
Right. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, talk about the advantages of the different models before we get into your experience specifically with setting up this business.
Yeah. So, I talked about our model where we have fully dedicated clinics, and we hire sub-investigators and then go out and contract with physicians in those markets to be principal investigators. The advantage there is that we can pivot pretty easily from one therapeutic area, one specialty to another. So I'll just make things up here. If, for instance, all of a sudden there was a bunch of R&D dollars being spent on kidney disease, we could very easily go out into the marketplace and find nephrologists to contract with. Or, let's say there's a pile of work going on in Alzheimer's, which is actually true today. And if that just evaporated, we can pivot to something else. I wouldn't call it a disadvantage, but one of the things that we consider is it does take some time to find suitable space, to negotiate lease agreements, to do the build out, and then to hire staff and everything. So we do like the other model, the embedded model. We like the embedded model as a means of establishing ourselves in a market sooner than we would, finding leasable space and what have you, things I just described. But always with the intent that our staff would leave that physician's practice and occupy day in day out our own clinic. So I think I just alluded to the advantages of being embedded. You can find a coordinator and embed that person in a physician's practice Monday morning, so
Right.
to speak. Yeah. The disadvantage there is um, if you're, let's say you're embedded in I'll just make things up here. You're embedded in a nephrology practice. Well, now you're limited to that specialty,
Right. You're
right?
tied.
Those
Yeah.
patients, the patients are kidney disease, right? And it's much harder to pivot or to get into other therapeutic areas or other specialties if you're embedded in some particular specialty like nephrology or dermatology or, you know, any of them.
Right. Sounds like one space, many possibilities, many spaces, narrower
Yeah,
possibilities. Right. So
yeah,
that's the trade
yeah,
off.
yeah, yeah.
So you recently took a new position here at Paradigm Clinical Research and used this was, I think, the most interesting thing, AI strategically to determine the geographic markets you're going to serve. What did that look like?
Yeah, so I can talk you through the how we did that. So I happen to be in Boise, Idaho, um, the hotbed of clinical research
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
world.
And fly
I'm
fishing, but yeah,
joking
go
about
on.
that a little bit. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I actually we've been we today are pretty successful in Idaho, and I have a prior life where we were also very successful in Idaho. Nevertheless, um, the way we got to the list of markets that are interesting to us was at the start very simple. I went to the website for the Boise airport and I looked at all the nonstop destinations because we're thinking that I'm here, head of clinical operations is here, and we need to get to these sites, every now and then. So there was 22 or so nonstop destinations from the airport here. We said to ourselves, okay, of those, we want to be able to get to them in half a day or less. So that meant we were focused on the western half of the U.S. And this is where then AI comes in. We used ChatGPT, the paid version, with some plugins, and there's a pile of plugins. I can't. I'm not an expert in all of this, but I think we found the right plugins. And we said to ChatGPT, of these nonstop destinations, which have uh, within a 2 hour drive um, populations with a significant proportion of people historically underrepresented in clinical research. So, in other words, where are we going to find some diversity within a 2 hour drive of these nonstop destinations? Again, because we wanted to be able to get there in half a day or less. And that came back with, that cut came back with quite a few. And then we just narrowed it down from there and prioritized and said to ourselves, for instance, we're in Redding, California, up in the northern Central Valley. We're already there. We're establishing a site in Sacramento and Modesto. Between Redding and, I'm just giving you an example here, between Redding and Sacramento is Chico. So Chico looks interesting to us. as well because it's got a significant proportion of people there who historically been underrepresented in clinical research, and it's a reasonable drive from Reading or from Sacramento, which allows us to use the staff that we already have on the ground and the relationships that we have there to get a good running start at establishing a site there. So that's one example of many where we've said to ourselves and used AI to say, this is a good market, this is close to where we already are, let's go there. And then in addition to that, that's sort of what we call our expansion strategy. Uh, and then we also have what we call a land and expand. So land just refers to markets where we don't have an established base yet, but the market's still interesting to us. So that's how that all came about.
I think. I
Not a,
mean, I have a.
I mean, not a very sophisticated use of AI, but it really helped us narrow down, which markets meet the profile that we're looking for,
Right.
including
It might.
diversity, right? I mean, that's what we're after.
Right. I mean, one, that's a good criteria, which I want to talk about in a second. Two,
Hmm.
a simple, so called simple or not sophisticated use of it, but probably a huge time saver. What would it take
Yeah,
otherwise to go
yeah,
through who knows what kind of
right,
demographic information
right.
for all those things? So, my question is about one, how did you validate the answers you got? Presumably, it doesn't just say, go to Chico, go to Reading, wherever. There, you had to get some real data behind those
Yeah,
answers, I presume. And then, I mean, it's just also interesting because you start at Boise and you think you're probably the farthest location from diversity to begin with,
right.
right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
that would be an
yeah. You don't
assumption.
think, yeah, yeah. You don't think diversity when you think Boise, Idaho, for sure, or you don't think diversity when you think about Idaho. I would say, around here, there's a there's a pretty significant population, Hispanic population and Native American population here. So it's not completely lacking in diversity.
Right.
But I will say, yeah, I mean, the AI tool that we use did come back specifically with, as an example, Chico. Um, and then, you want to validate that, you sort of want to say to yourself, okay, that sounds interesting. Let's actually go look at some demographic data to make sure that ChatGPT has actually landed on something that fits the profile we're looking for. And so we did that, and sure enough, in every case, what ChatGPT told us was valid.
Yeah, that's an interesting story. I mean, I was at a conference last week, the SAMPS meeting, and it was
Oh
all
yeah,
about
yeah,
AI and saving a lot of time, but also making sure you validate all the answers you get coming out of it. But
yeah,
certainly has huge potential to save a bunch of time.
yeah.
You're using chatbots as part of your recruitment, also for
Hmm.
people interested in participating. So how do you establish your own confidence in that the answers that they present, if they come onto a site and sort
Yeah,
of qualifying themselves for participation?
yeah. I mean, there's some obvious validation work that needs to go on there to make sure that folks are getting the right answers to the questions that they're asking. So what we've done in that case, and this is with an outside vendor. We didn't develop this in house, but as an example, we do a good bit of advertising on, say, Facebook for particular studies. So if somebody comes to one of our ads for Facebook and they want to learn more, there's an opportunity for them to get to our website. And once on our website, there's a AI-powered chatbot where we've provided to this tool the protocol, the investigator brochures, whatever it is that we have in hand for that study. And you can, as a layperson, say, "Hey, what kind of studies do you have that I might be interested in?" And the chatbot will come back and say, "Well, tell me a little bit more about yourself, um, age, things like that," in an attempt to narrow down using the inclusion exclusion whether or not we actually have studies that this person would qualify for. And you might say, as the user of this, how much am I going to be paid? What is the stipend for that? And then this tool goes back looks at the protocol and whatever else we've fed into it and comes back with an answer to those things. When all said and done, if you're, as a user, um, if you say, yeah, okay, I'm very interested in this, that tool will look at our calendars and find an available opportunity for a phone call uh, with that potential uh, study volunteer. So, like I said, we haven't built this in house. We're using a third party on this one. I haven't found that in this space, the tool like that yet. I'm sure there's others working on it, but I would say we're sort of in beta right now on that. But everything that I've seen is pretty slick and very cool, and it saves us some time and having somebody on call to answer what might be coming through our chat feature on the website. So that's kind of
Right.
cool, and it helps us narrow down the people that are actually interested and eligible for studies. So it's one of these things that just improves the efficiency of our operations and overall clinical research.
Exactly. I mean, when you said someone might come to the site and say, "What studies do you have?" A bad chatbot would just dump a list on them, right? But a
Hmm.
good chatbot says, "Well,
Yeah,
tell
right,
me how old you are and a little bit of history, and then okay, here's the ones already trying to hone in
right,
on exactly the
right.
right ones."
I mean, even location, right? We don't have, like you just heard a minute ago, we don't have sites all over the country. There's certain markets that we're in. So if you're out in, I don't know, upstate Maine, I really can't, I really can't help you. I don't have a site up there, as an example.
Yeah. Talk about AI, using AI to identify the best business opportunities, and what historical contracts have looked like. So, using the AI to sort of set up how you negotiate those contracts and just
Hmm.
get that information that helps you be a better negotiator.
Yeah, again, this is a tool that we're working with someone else on. We don't have AI experts in house, but
Yeah.
we're working on. I think in the end, what this does is help us be more efficient in figuring out which studies are good studies for us, and just makes that whole sales process from beginning to end a little more efficient. So if you think about, you, there's some lead generation work where you're, finding new studies that go into your sales pipeline. We happen to use Salesforce.com to manage as a CRM to manage our sales pipeline. There's a feasibility process where the sponsor or CRO will send over a feasibility questionnaire, and then my staff is out talking to our sites and our investigators saying, in the first instance, do we have this patient population? Can we access this patient population best based on the inclusion exclusion? So it's a lot of manual intervention. And then there's a lot of back and forth on contract terms and on budgets. So we're looking at a tool that will say to us, here's the pipeline based on history and what we've done before and how we've been successful. Here are the opportunities in that sales pipeline that are most likely winnable. I'll use that term, winnable, where we're going to get sites selected. And then, in terms of the feasibility questionnaire that I mentioned, this tool will go back and look at history and what we've answered before for feasibility questionnaires, and then come back and say, here's the data that you've presented before. And then the same thing as we get into negotiating contract terms and budgets, it'll go back and look at the history of what for this particular procedure, what has been the range of what's been the cost estimate range for that particular procedure, what have we won, and then comes back and says, okay, here's the AI part of this, comes back and says, okay, after looking at all of this, here's where you have the best opportunity to win business. And it's not, it's predictive, it's not prescriptive. So we may say to ourselves, okay, AI, you told us this, but that's not really, we're trying to get out of that therapeutic area and get into something else. So it's not like we just take AI's word for it. There's
Right.
some manual or human intervention in that obviously, in that decision-making process. But it does help us, just be more efficient. There's a lot of opportunities, study opportunities out there, and you can't chase everything. So, we have defined, I would say, half a dozen or so therapeutic areas that are of interest to us, and those are the ones that we focus on. But having a
Right.
tool
That
that having a tool that looks at all of that data historically and is able to come back and predict which of those is more winnable for us than others is a huge time saver.
right. Yeah. That all that historical. It's kind of like comparable data on housing sales or whatever. Like what works,
Yeah,
what doesn't, what's the range, what's the price.
yeah,
Also, I'm just thinking about like the reduction of burden on somebody's mind to go, which one of
right,
these should I go after? Which you could spin your
right.
head around a lot on, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So now we've discussed three applications for AI. What got you or whoever it was within your company to say we should use ChatGPT to do this? Or what was the motivation? Did you just say it's about time we try it? How did you get started?
Yeah. Well, I guess I don't know. I don't know if I would say oddly enough, but the way that it all came about is we have a board member whose husband happens to know as much about machine learning and uh, AI things. Again, I'm not the expert here,
Yeah.
but he happens to be an expert in this. And our board member got talking to her husband about what clinical research looks like and all the the inefficiency in it. And we started talking about particular use cases and where we could see the biggest return. Where was the low-hanging fruit? Where could we see the biggest return on on these tools? And that's how it all really got started. Um, I mean, I'm a big fan. That might come across already, but
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of what I see. I use it every day. It's even for things like response. If I need to draft anything, but, some posting to social media or a message to the entire company or a response to an email, or if I need to develop a job description or anything like that, it is a huge time saver. And I would say what I get back from the likes of ChatGPT is probably 80 to 90% there. So it's on me to it doesn't come back perfect.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's the expectation. But if I can get 80 or 90% of the way there, um, that's a tremendous time saver.
It's well, this is why I love this conversation is because obviously had a connection to someone who was an advocate for using
Hmm.
ChatGPT. But the things you mentioned, aside from having heard stories of people say, "Hey, ChatGPT, I'm going to Europe next week. Map me out. 3 days here, 3 days there. What should I see? And I want to spend this much on hotels." But
Yeah,
to say, I want to explore a market. Tell me where the people are who meet these criteria within a half a day flight of Boise. Well,
hmm,
it sounds simple, but I don't think that's the way people are typically thinking of using it. A lot for what you said,
yeah,
drafting. I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, there's a very good chance that the the email you get from me is going to be drafted by
yeah,
ChatGPT based on this transcript, which I will then go in and, as much as possible, try to make it sound like me because the hardest part of this
yeah,
whole production for me is writing the notes at the end. I spend
yeah,
way more time writing the notes than talking to you.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
and so
yeah,
and so far 3 out of 4 have been good. One of them I just said what came back was not good.
yeah, yeah.
But
Yeah,
I
I mean,
think
it's amazing how you can say, okay, that sounds what you came back, ChatGPT. That's interesting what you came back to me with, but make it more formal, or put it more in my in my the way I would say it, or make it less formal, or make it shorter, make it make it longer, or I want you to you I want I want you to say this in what you come back with. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. We had a The other thing I find a little bit interesting is I've seen people, in the instructions to, the likes of ChatGPT say, please, please do this as if they're, speaking to somebody, some real human. So it's amazing how much time you can save and, what actually comes back when you prompt it with the right, um, the right ask, I'll say. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a little off topic, but the one that didn't work, I tried to give it some of my writing and said write it like me, and it wrote it as if I were the guest. Like Chris said this, Chris said that, and no, that's
Yeah.
not. And then I said I want you to do it again, writing it as if you were me, and it came back with
Right.
a very nice article, none of which was all accurate and related, but none of which was
Yeah.
actually in our conversation.
Yeah.
So
That's interesting. Yeah.
I just threw that one out. I'm doing it myself this week. Last question. So the site business, part of the life science world that I don't know a lot about, haven't known a lot. You see
Yeah.
a lot of good things happening in this business. What do you see changing in the next couple of years?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I might be a little biased here, but I mean, one thing for sure is there's a lot of consolidation going on in the world of clinical research sites, which sort of makes sense, right? I mean, we saw for a few decades the CRO world consolidating. There are, whatever the estimates are, thousands of clinical research sites. I think just in the U.S. I mean, there's certainly a lot. And I always say, what other market spends, billions of dollars a year on such a fragmented set of providers, right? So I think it's just a natural course that sites are being consolidated, and there's a lot of interest from the world of investors in that, and you see it almost every day. Somebody's acquired somebody else. That's for sure. I think uh, I think there's a disruptive element to CROs. Uh, if it isn't here already, I think it's coming. So I don't think CROs are going to go away altogether. But I think some of the services that have historically been provided by CROs are now going to wind up in some of these larger sites. And if you think about it, where are these patients? For patient studies, where are these patients? They're not in the CROs, certainly, right? They're in the sites. They're in the physician's practice again for these patient studies. So it makes sense to focus there, um, on making clinical research, a little more efficient, than it is today. And I think finally, we talked about this some. There's a big push for greater diversity among the people that actually participate in clinical research, all for very good reasons. But I think we'll also see, and I'm not saying anything that nobody, that is new here or novel. I think there's also a push for not just more sites, but more diversity among the investigators as well. So it's a diversity. It's a question of diversity, not just among the people who are participating, but also the investigators. And so again, I mean that ties into our strategy about which markets that look interesting to us in the end.
Right. That makes me think about, and I don't want to. I'm wondering, like, what as a site business, what it looks like there's a lot of opportunity for efficiencies in consolidation because many sites, I presume, you correct me if I'm wrong, are doing similar things, whether in different indications.
Hmm.
But there's a basic underlying, I don't know, formula, for lack of a better word, about how you work.
Yeah.
And it seems like there could be a huge amount of efficiency gained by
Yeah.
systematizing in smaller groups.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, there will be studies that have particular nuances to them, but I mean, when you all said and done, you know, one site is doing or is responsible for the same things as some other site. I mean, you're finding patients that are eligible for the studies, and then managing those patients through the schedule of events, and collecting data. Hopefully, it's clean and accurate and timely, and then reporting that to the CRO or sponsor. So at its core, we're all doing the same thing. Um, I think it's just a question of where are the differences. The differences are driven by the types of studies and the therapeutic areas that you're involved in. Yeah. So
Right.
yeah, I think you're
Yeah.
right.
So
I think
what I
there's a
was
tremendous amount
getting
of
at is
efficiency. Yeah.
your differentiator is your populations and access to physicians, like the combination
Right.
of the diverse population of patients and therapeutic areas, and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
provide something that's yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where you differentiate yourself. Also, in the operating model too, like I was saying, the way we do it with, fully dedicated clinics versus, these embedded, folks that are embedded. And I'm not arguing one way or the other. Like I said
Right.
before, they all have their advantages and disadvantages. I think the one, just as a quick promo maybe for Paradigm, I think the thing that makes us a little bit unique, and I mentioned this earlier, is that we hire sub-investigators too. We have sub-investigators who are typically mid-level practitioners, put them on our payroll, and that the thing that's interesting about that is those sub-investigators unburden the principal investigators, not entirely, but to a large extent, so that those principal investigators, who are typically for us uh, in private practice, they can continue to keep an eye on their private practice, continue to see patients in that practice, make sure that their practice is successful, and still participate in clinical research studies. Right?
Right.
You can't be totally absent. Of course, you can't be. There needs to be sufficient PI oversight for every study. So it's not like you're an absent PI. That's a bad thing to have. But those sub investigators, I think, are the thing that is the primary value proposition that we one of the primary value propositions that we offer our investigators. That's my quick
Nice.
yeah, that's my quick promo there.
No, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I like it. So, Kurt Messina, this has been great. Thank you so much for teaching us about unique uses of AI and the clinical site business. And I will certainly put a link to you and Paradigm Clinical Research in the show notes.
Okay. Yeah, appreciate it, Chris. It's been a pleasure. I'm happy to chat about these things. Been doing it a long time, and yeah, anytime. Happy to
I
happy
like
to
it.
help.